1949 to 1959 was a decade where American police departments faced a problem nobody had solved before. Civilian cars were leaving patrol cars in the dust. Detroit's horsepower war was handing outlaws bigger engines every single year, and every department in the country was scrambling to catch up before somebody outran the law for good. Newspapers ran stories almost every year about stolen cars that simply drove away from responding officers, not because the drivers were skilled, but because the machinery chasing them had no business winning that race in the first place. Insurance companies even started tracking the trend, quietly noting that certain makes and models were becoming favorites among car thieves specifically because they knew local police fleets couldn't touch them on an open road. Some departments found the answer, and when they did, criminals learned the hard way that the black and white in their rearview mirror wasn't bluffing anymore. Today we're counting down 8 police pursuit cars from 1949 to the late 1950s that were fast enough to end a getaway before it even started. Number 1 still shows up in true crime folklore for a reason nobody expects. 8. 1949 Ford Custom V8. The 1949 Ford Custom looked almost gentle by later standards. Rounded fenders, a simple horizontal grille, no fins, no chrome excess, just a clean post-war shape that could have belonged to anybody's neighbor. That was exactly the point. Underneath the unassuming sheet metal sat Ford's flathead V8, a design that had already been terrorizing bank robbers for over a decade thanks to one very famous outlaw who once wrote Henry Ford a letter praising the engine's getaway speed. By 1949, departments across the Midwest were running that same flathead V8 in pursuit trim, pushing it past 95 miles per hour on open highway, a number that felt genuinely alarming for a four-door sedan built the same year television sets were still a novelty. What made the flathead dangerous wasn't raw output. It was reliability. Officers could run the engine hot for miles of sustained pursuit without it seizing up. Something lighter, more highly strung engines from smaller manufacturers couldn't always promise. Mechanics of the era also loved the flathead for a simpler reason. It was cheap and fast to repair between shifts. A patrol car that took damage in one chase could be back on the road the very next day instead of sitting in a garage for a week. The flathead wasn't subtle and it wasn't refined, but it was relentless. For criminals who assumed a police car couldn't keep pace with a modified coupe, the 49 Custom was the first real wake-up call of the decade. 7. 1950 Oldsmobile 88 Rocket. Oldsmobile walked into 1950 with something almost nobody else in Detroit had yet. A modern overhead valve V8 stuffed into a mid-size body that was never designed to carry that much weight and horsepower. The Rocket 88 wore a simple two-tone paint scheme, a toothy chrome grille, and rounded fenders that gave it an almost cheerful look. Nothing about the styling screamed danger. But that Rocket V8 was putting out 135 horsepower in a car that weighed barely over 3,400 pounds, a power-to-weight ratio nothing else on the street could match in 1950. NASCAR noticed first. The Rocket 88 dominated the earliest stock car seasons before police departments ever got their hands on one, winning race after race against bigger, heavier cars that simply couldn't keep up through the corners. That racing pedigree wasn't just bragging rights. It directly proved the engine could survive hours of sustained high RPM abuse without falling apart. Exactly the kind of stress test a real pursuit put it through on the street. Once departments did get their hands on one, criminals who'd read about its racing reputation in the paper found out it wasn't exaggerated. Officers reported closing distances on fleeing drivers that would have been impossible in a 1949 model, sometimes cutting a 2-mile head start down to nothing in 9 or 10 miles of open road. Word of that spread fast between departments too, and within a couple of years the Rocket 88 became one of the most requested police vehicles in the country, ordered by name instead of just by manufacturer. The Rocket 88 didn't just win races. It quietly rewrote what a patrol car was allowed to be. 6. 1951 Hudson Hornet. The Hudson Hornet is the car most people forget was ever a police vehicle because everybody remembers it as a racetrack legend instead. Its silhouette was low, almost startlingly low for 1951, thanks to Hudson's unibody step-down design that dropped the floor pan below the frame rails instead of on top of them. That single engineering decision lowered the car's center of gravity in a way nothing else on the road could replicate, and it made the Hornet handle corners like it was cheating. Under the hood sat a 308 cubic inch inline six, an engine layout everyone assumed couldn't compete with the new V8s flooding the market. It competed anyway. The Hornet's low stance let it carry speed through curves that would have sent a top-heavy sedan sliding off the road. Pursuit drivers who chased fleeing cars through winding backroads found the Hornet stuck to the pavement in a way that felt almost unfair. On the NASCAR circuit that same year, the Hornet won an almost unheard-of number of races running against V8-powered competition, a statistic that quietly convinced several state police fleets to give the step-down design a chance despite its unconventional six-cylinder heart. What sealed the deal for a lot of departments was cost. A Hornet on patrol cost noticeably less to maintain than a V8 rival, which meant smaller budget sheriff's offices in rural counties could afford a genuinely competitive pursuit car instead of settling for whatever was cheapest on the lot. Criminals who tried to lose a Hornet on a curve learned the hard way that low and steady beat big and heavy. 5. 1953 Studebaker Commander. Studebaker isn't a name most people associate with police pursuit at all, and that's exactly what made the 1953 Commander such an effective sleeper. Its body was radically low and aerodynamic for the era, styled with a wraparound windshield and a shape that looked more like a European coupe than an American sedan, years ahead of what Detroit's Big Three were building. That aerodynamic shape wasn't just for looks. It cut wind resistance in a way that let the Commander's V8 punch above its weight, and departments in smaller jurisdictions that couldn't afford a Hudson or an Oldsmobile found the Commander gave them comparable top-end speed for a fraction of the price. Studebaker leaned hard into that image too, running national advertisements that showed the Commander outrunning airplanes down a runway, a marketing stunt that was more theater than fact but reflected exactly how the company wanted the car perceived. The catch was reliability under sustained high-speed chase conditions, where the Commander sometimes struggled compared to the heavier-built competition, its lighter frame occasionally showing wear after repeated hard pursuit runs. But on a straight stretch of highway, criminals who underestimated a Studebaker in their mirror learned that low and slippery could out-accelerate cars that looked far more intimidating. 4. 1955 Chrysler C300. By 1955, Chrysler had stopped playing it safe. The C300 wore a stripped-down Imperial-inspired grille with dual headlights and almost no extraneous chrome, a deliberately restrained look built around one goal: speed, not spectacle. Under the hood sat Chrysler's 331 cubic inch firepower Hemi, rated at a genuinely shocking 300 horsepower, the number the car was named after. That made the C300 the most powerful American production car available at the time, full stop. Here's the detail most people miss. The C300 wasn't officially marketed as a police package the way Ford and Dodge courted departments directly. Chrysler barely advertised it for law enforcement use at all, which meant most criminals had no idea a car with that kind of horsepower was even eligible to be sitting in a patrol lineup. The C300 also carried something almost no other pursuit car of the era had: genuine NASCAR pedigree, having swept the Grand National Series that same year against a field of cars running lesser engines. That racing dominance wasn't a coincidence. It was the same engine, the same durability, dropped straight into a patrol assignment, which meant every stress test the Hemi passed on a closed track was a preview of exactly what it could survive on an open interstate. The ones who found out what that meant on the street did so at well over 125 miles per hour, with nowhere left to run. 3. 1956 Buick Century. Buick built the Century around one blunt idea: take the smallest, lightest body in the lineup and drop the biggest engine Buick made into it. The result looked deceptively upscale, all soft chrome curves and Buick's signature portholes along the front fenders, the kind of car that read as comfortable, not threatening. Underneath sat a 322 cubic inch V8 producing 255 horsepower, mated to a body that weighed noticeably less than Buick's full-size models. That combination earned the Century a nickname among enthusiasts that stuck for decades: the banker's hot rod, a car that looked like it belonged in a church parking lot, but ran like something built for a track. Police departments that adopted the Century found a car that could out-accelerate almost anything else in its price class off the line, and its lighter body meant less strain on brakes and suspension during the kind of hard, repeated stops a pursuit vehicle actually needed to survive. Some officers who drove both a full-size Buick and a Century back-to-back described the difference as driving two completely different brands, not two trims of the same car. Criminals who assumed a Buick meant a slow, cushy ride discovered the hard way that portholes and chrome trim were hiding one of the fastest engines of 1956 wrapped in the least intimidating body on the list. 2. 1957 Ford Fairlane Police Interceptor 312. Ford came back into the pursuit conversation in 1957 with a car built specifically to erase the memory of slower, softer police Fords from earlier in the decade. From the outside, the Fairlane Interceptor looked almost identical to the civilian version sitting in driveways across the country. The same rectangular grille, the same restrained chrome trim, nothing to give it away. That was deliberate. Under the hood sat a 312 cubic inch V8 built specifically for law enforcement use, running a hotter camshaft, reinforced bottom end, and larger valves than anything Ford sold to the public, pushing output past 270 horsepower. Ford barely promoted this engine option at all, no brochure spreads, no dealership displays, the kind of package you only found out existed if a department specifically asked for it by name. Some departments went a step further and ordered the Interceptor with a taller rear axle ratio, specifically tuned for sustained top-speed highway pursuit rather than city-street acceleration, a small mechanical detail that made a real difference on long interstate chases. Criminals who'd learned to recognize a police car by its badges and light bar had no way of spotting an Interceptor 312 idling at a stoplight. By the time the siren came on, recognizing it no longer mattered. 1. 1958 Plymouth Fury. Most people who know the 1958 Plymouth Fury today know it as the car from a horror story, not a police case file, which makes its real history almost stranger than the fiction. Plymouth built the Fury as a limited-run performance flagship, wrapped in a striking gold anodized trim that ran along the fins and rocker panels, a car engineered to turn heads even sitting still. Under the hood sat a 350 cubic inch V8 pushing 305 horsepower, backed by a dual quad carburetor setup that made it the single most powerful car Plymouth had ever built. Selected departments quietly acquired Furies for high-speed interstate patrol, and on the open road it could reportedly touch speeds approaching 145 miles per hour, numbers that sounded more like a factory race car than a family brand's flagship sedan. Here's the twist almost nobody mentions. Plymouth was marketed to families, its advertisements built around safety and value, not speed, which meant the Fury's reputation on paper had nothing to do with what it was actually capable of on the road. That gap between image and reality was so wide that even some officers assigned to drive one reportedly needed a moment to adjust to just how much car was sitting under them. Nothing about the brand's reputation prepared criminals for the idea that the same badge sitting on their neighbor's driveway could run down a stolen car at nearly triple the interstate speed limit. That mismatch between reputation and reality is exactly what earns the 1958 Fury the top spot on this list. The testing grounds, the horsepower wars, and the quiet police-only engine packages built through this decade didn't disappear when the 50s ended. They became the blueprint every pursuit vehicle program since has followed, right down to the Interceptor packages still rolling off assembly lines today. These 8 cars were the ones that proved speed could be hidden in plain sight, wearing a badge nobody suspected until it was already too late to run. What ties all 8 together isn't just horsepower on a spec sheet. It's the same pattern repeating decade after decade. The fastest patrol cars were rarely the loudest or most obvious ones. They were the ones that looked ordinary right up until the moment they weren't. If you had to sit behind the wheel of one of these 8 during a real 1950s pursuit, would you pick the brute force Hemi power of the Chrysler C300 or the sleeper shock of the Plymouth Fury? Drop your answer in the comments.